It was the sort of morning that muffled sound and thought alike, grey and silent, with the mist curled low over the rolling lawns of Hunter's Edge, and the autumn damp seeping into the bones of the earth. A thin drizzle clung to the hedgerows, like breath on a mirror, and the crows had fallen silent, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Inspector Harold Finchley adjusted his hat against the moisture and surveyed the house before him, a large Georgian manor of faded grandeur, set well back from the road behind rattan gates and a pair of weathered stone lions. It had once belonged to the Ashford family, then passed to the Devenishers through marriage and money. Now it belonged to no one. The body inside had changed that. He had received the call just after 7. "Uncle is dead," the voice had said, clipped, controlled, female, stabbed in the conservatory. "Please come at once." Finchley had asked only one question. Was the door locked? "Yes," she'd replied. "From the inside." Now, as he made his way up the gravel drive, boots crunching faintly in the hush, he wondered at the stillness of it all. A murder had occurred in the house, and yet there were no signs, no flurry of servants, no running footsteps, no shouting. The great house slumbered as though tragedy was simply another piece of furniture to be polished and preserved. The front door opened before he could knock, revealing a young woman of perhaps 27. Her eyes were blue-gray, intelligent, and tired. She wore a belted wool dress of forest green and no makeup. In another setting she might have been quite striking. "Inspector Finchley," she asked. "I'm Clara de Venich. Please come in." He stepped inside, removing his hat. The air was warm, but it carried a tension so thick it could be felt, like the sharp tang of ozone before lightning. The interior was exactly what one might expect of a country estate: high ceilings, ancestral portraits with accusing eyes, dark, polished wood, and the faint smell of beeswax and old tobacco. Without further pleasantries, Clara led him down a long, carpeted hallway to the rear of the house, her footsteps soft but certain. It happened just after breakfast. She said, "Uncle usually read his newspaper in the conservatory for an hour or so before beginning his correspondence. I went to check on him because the tea tray hadn't been touched." She opened a pair of glass-pane doors. The conservatory was flooded with grey light, and its plants, ferns, palms, a creeping passion flower pressed against the glass like void. Amidst this jungle sat the form of a man, perfectly upright in a high-backed wicker chair, his head tilted slightly as if listening to a distant conversation. He was dressed in a neatly tailored grey suit, his fingers resting on the carved arms of the chair. The hilt of a small dagger, elegant and ornate, jutted out from the center of his chest. He had not spilled a single drop of blood onto the floor. Finchley crouched beside the body. "No struggle. None that we could see," Clara replied. "And the dagger, it's not from the house. Aunt Lenora said she's never seen it before." "Where are the others?" "In the drawing room. I asked everyone to remain." Finchley stood. "You say the doors were locked?" "Yes. This one," she indicated the door to the garden, "was bolted from the inside, and the one we came through was closed when I arrived." He turned, "And the windows, they're latched." "Every one of them." Finchley said nothing for a moment, then turned to her. "You said we. Who is in the house?" Clara hesitated. "6 of us, including me, my cousin Anthony, my Aunt Lenora, Mr. Ewan Rigby, Uncle's assistant, and 2 guests, Marius Vale and his sister, Daphne. They arrived 3 days ago for Uncle's birthday. He was celebrating. Not exactly he liked to gather people." Finchley glanced again at the corpse, and now someone has ungathered him. The drawing room was a portrait in anxiety. It was a handsome space, high windows, oak bookcases, an impressive fireplace framed by alabaster busts, but none of the room's refinement could mask the nervous energy that hung about its occupants. Anthony de Venich, 35, wiry and restless, with a mop of black hair and the sharp eyes of a man accustomed to seeing angles, he lounged against the fireplace, cigarette in hand, tapping it repeatedly into an empty tray, though he hadn't lit it. Aunt Lenora sat stiffly on the velvet settee, wrapped in a plum-colored shawl that only emphasized her theatrical melancholy. She sniffed often, though no tears had made an appearance. Ewan Rigby stood near the windows, tall and correct, his hands folded in front of him like a pallbearer. He looked, Finchley noted, not shocked, but exhausted. The Vale siblings sat slightly apart. Marius, dark and immaculately groomed, exuded charm like a man used to turning heads. His sister Daphne, pale and ethereal, stared out at the garden with the detachment of a poet or an opium dreamer. Finchley addressed them without preamble. "There has been a murder. Mr. Horace de Venich was stabbed sometime between 8 and 9 this morning. The weapon is unknown to the household. The conservatory was locked from within. I shall require statements from each of you." A murmur passed through the group. "Locked from the inside," Marius Vale said smoothly. "How terribly inconvenient. For the killer, you think this is a game," Anthony snapped. "Gentlemen," Finchley interrupted, "I suggest we do not speculate. Facts first. The truth, I promise, will make itself known in due time." He paused, his gaze sweeping the group. "Until then, no one is to leave the house or grounds. I'll be contacting the chief constable to arrange for a team. For now, consider yourselves under informal house arrest." "Are we suspects?" Aunt Lenora gasped. Finchley turned to her. Until we find someone who isn't. Yes. By the time statements had been collected, brief, vague, largely identical, the sun had clawed its way through the mist. But it brought no warmth. That Finchley stood again in the conservatory, studying the body. Horace de Venish had been set, sharp as ever, by all accounts. No illness, no known enemies. Not beloved, perhaps, but respected, feared even. There was no sign of forced entry. The weapon was unique, a Florentine stiletto with a carved ivory handle, untraceable, personal. The kind of knife someone brings with purpose. Curious, Finchley murmured. At that moment, the sound of a car pulling up the gravel path reached his ears. He turned and made his way to the front door. A small black Daimler stood purring like a contented cat. The door opened, and out stepped a compact man of precise bearing. Dressed in a gray three-piece suit and patent leather shoes so polished, the clouds could be seen in them. He removed his hat, revealing an egg-shaped head, an impeccable mustache, and eyes that glittered with intelligence. "Hercule Poirot," he said, bowing ever so slightly. "I understand there is a locked room, and a dead man inside it." The room had not changed. The dead man remained seated as though waiting for his tea. The creeping tendrils of the passion flower above had begun to droop from the midday heat, their blooms watching silently like a congregation of mourners. Poirot, which stood perfectly still in the doorway of the conservatory, his hands clasped behind his back. His gaze took in every detail, the symmetry of the scene, the unnatural stillness of the corpse, the absence of mess or panic. Nothing disordered, nothing accidental. "A man sits alone in a locked room," he said softly, more to himself than to Inspector Finchley, "and dies by a blade to the heart, cleanly, swiftly, and without the faintest whisper of struggle. Mon ami, what do you observe?" Finchley, not unused to Poirot's tendency to ask rhetorical questions, replied evenly. "I observe that no one could have left without being seen or without unlocking the doors or windows. It's a sealed box, and the killer vanished into air." Poirot stepped forward, his eyes not on the body, but on the floorboards. "There is no such thing as disappearance into air. Only misdirection, and sometimes faith in human blindness. May I approach?" Finchley nodded. Poirot crouched beside the chair, tilting his head. "You see here," he said, gesturing to the man's waistcoat, "there is no tear, no struggle, no clumsy angle of entry. It was placed," he mimed the motion delicately, "exactly between the fourth and fifth rib, with precision. He was seated when it happened," Finchley said. "Or made to appear so afterward," Poirot added. "But yes, perhaps. What is this here?" He pointed to a small, almost imperceptible dark smear on the right arm of the chair. "Not blood, ink. Perhaps I missed that. Do not be discouraged, mon ami. You are like the English bulldog, loyal, determined, and always chewing at the thing in front of you. But sometimes," he tapped his forehead, "it is not in the chewing but in the seeing." Poirot rose and turned toward the glass doors. "You say they were locked, bolted from the inside," Finchley gestured. "Both doors, the main and garden doors, were secure. No signs of forced entry, no tampering with the bolts, and the windows latched tight. Then let us speak with those inside. The living, they often betray the dead with words." The drawing-room had grown colder in mood, though the sun now streamed through the tall windows. The 6 guests, though seated more formally than before, now seemed more frayed at the edges. Poirot's entrance brought with it a curious mix of wariness and hope. He bowed with old-world courtesy made up. "Messieurs, my name is Hercule Poirot. I have been asked to assist in the delicate matter of Mr. de Venish's death. I assure you, I do not accuse, I do not presume, but I do observe. And the truth, she always tells herself in the end." "Yes." Anthony de Venish, who had lit another cigarette he had no intention of smoking, gave a derisive snort. "So you've come to solve the impossible, have you?" Poirot gave him a patient smile. "The impossible, monsieur, I do not think so. Difficult, yes, curious indeed, but not impossible. Shall we begin with what happened last night? You were all here, I understand." Aunt Lenora took it upon herself to speak first. "It was Horace's birthday. We dined at 8. The cook served roast duck, as always. He insisted on it, said it reminded him of his Oxford days, though I suspect it had more to do with making others uncomfortable." She dabbed her eyes again. "Afterwards we moved to the drawing-room. Bridge, sherry, conversation. He was in a rare mood, quite ... pointed." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Pointed, critical," said Anthony. That had a talent for that. Digging the knife in, metaphorically speaking, though. "I see he's finally been hoist with his own petard, Anthony," Clara snapped. "He was your uncle." "Yes, and a miserable one," Anthony replied. But there was no venom behind the words, only weariness. Poirot turned to Clara gently. "Mademoiselle, you found the body?" "Yes, this morning, around 8:15. You entered alone?" She nodded. "He hadn't touched his tea. I knocked, then opened the conservatory doors. He was ... sitting there. I didn't even scream. It was too quiet for that." Poirot gave her a slight nod of approval, and no one else was awake. "Mrs. Fitz, the housekeeper, was in the kitchen. The others came down after I rang the bell." Poirot's eyes flicked to Marius and Daphne Vale. "You are guests?" "Yes." "What brought you to Hunter's Edge?" Marius answered smoothly. Horace invited us. He and our father were old adversaries. Barristers both. They clashed in court several times. I suppose Horace wanted to meet the next generation of Vales before he died. Poirot tilted his head. That is rather unusual, and you accepted? Curiosity, Marius said with a shrug, and Daphne thought the countryside would help her nerves. Daphne, who had not yet spoken, now turned her pale eyes to Poirot. Mr. Devenish frightened me, she said softly. Not physically, but he said things, quiet things, as if he knew what you were thinking before you said it. Poirot's gaze lingered on her for a moment. Yes, he said. He had the lawyer's gift for dissection, and the killer's for precision. A silence fell. Poirot stepped back. There is a phrase I have always held close. Everyone lies but the truth. She leaves fingerprints. I will be speaking with each of you privately. Until then, I ask that you remain where you are. Do not confer. Do not tamper with your memories. They are delicate things. He and Finchley retired to the study, where the late Horace Devenish had kept his library and his writing desk. The room smelled of vellum and pipe smoke. Poirot moved slowly, touching nothing but observing everything: the layout of the furniture, the position of a worn carpet, a clock that ticked half a second behind its chime. You see, said, this man lived alone but with precision. Nothing is careless here. Everything is placed. So too with his death. Finchley sat stiffly by the hearth. You think it was someone close? I think, said Poirot, that a stranger does not murder in silence and leave a room sealed. No, this was intimate, methodical, perhaps planned, perhaps impulsive, but not random. He turned back to Finchley. What of the dagger? It's unlike anything in the house, antique, possibly Italian. There's no maker's mark. Then it was brought here by the killer. A man does not stumble upon such a thing by accident. He carries it for purpose. Poirot's gaze drifted to the window. We must understand not just who wished Horace Devenish dead, but who had the skill to make it seem like the room killed him. The morning's mist had burned away by midday, revealing the estate's full expanse, manicured lawns, a small ornamental lake, and beyond that, the dense woods that framed the property like a theater curtain. But the real drama, Poirot knew, was unfolding within the polished walls of Hunter's Edge. The house was both stage and trapped on the drawing room. The 6 individuals involved in the case had been asked to remain. Tea had been served on a silver tray, but few had touched it. Even Aunt Lenora's affectations had quieted, her brooches glinting silently as she stared into the middle distance. Poirot, having finished his preliminary survey of the conservatory and study, requested to speak to Mr. Ewan Rigby, the deceased's assistant alone. They retired to the study once more. It was a curious room, arranged not for comfort but for control. The shelves were filled with law books, journals, and case files. No photographs, no awards. Just volumes of case precedent, and not a single family portrait in sight. Behind the desk, a glass-fronted cabinet sat fastened with a brass lock. Ewan Rigby entered with the stiffness of a man reporting for sentencing. He was in his early 40s, sharply dressed but entirely without flair. His tie was sober, his shoes polished, his hair parted with mathematical precision. He sat only when invited and kept his hands clasped on his lap, like a schoolboy in confession. Poirot studied him for a moment before speaking. Monsieur Rigby, I understand you have worked for Mr. Devenish for how many years? 9, said Rigby. I joined shortly after his retirement from the bench. Ah, yes, he did not enjoy idle hands, I imagine. No, sir. He remained active in arbitration and private legal consultation, occasionally consulted on difficult trials behind the scenes. Would you describe him as beloved? Rigby's mouth twitched. Respected Mr. Poirot. Poirot smiled gently. Respect. It is a cold companion in old age. He preferred it that way. He valued precision, discipline, order. Poirot's eyes slid toward the locked cabinet and secrets. Rigby stiffened slightly. He had a strong sense of privacy. Privacy is only another word for concealment, monsieur. May I ask, who had access to this cabinet? No one, said Rigby. Only Mr. Devenish. Even I wasn't permitted to open it. He kept the key with him at all times, either on a chain around his neck or in the drawer by his bedside. Poirot approached the cabinet, and now the key isn't in the drawer, nor was it found on his person. Poirot looked up sharply. Ah, curious. Nest CP. A man is murdered, and the one key to his private cabinet is missing. Would you know what it contained? Rigby hesitated, then shook his head. Only that he kept his personal papers in their legal notes, correspondence, a few sensitive files. Sensitive to whom? To others. Mr. Poirot. Mr. Devenish had a habit of collecting what he called moral leverage, blackmail. Rigby bristled. Not in the vulgar sense. He simply ... kept things that might later serve justice or vengeance. Silence. Poirot stepped closer, inspecting the cabinet's lock. This was not forced. The person who opened this knew what they were after. The key was either taken before the murder or after. He turned back to Rigby. Now, monsieur, where were you this morning before the body was discovered? I came down just before the bell rang. I was in my room reading. Alone, yes. No one can confirm this. No. And last night, after bridge, I retired early. Mr. Devenish and I had a small disagreement about a case note. I thought it best to let him cool off. Was this disagreement serious? Rigby's jaw clenched faintly. No more than usual. Poirot made a note in his pocket diary. One final question. Did your employer mention receiving any unusual letters recently? Anonymous messages? Unexpected visitors? Rigby hesitated, then said, 2 weeks ago, he received a single sheet of parchment. No return address, no writing, just a drawing. Poirot looked up sharply. A drawing. Rigby nodded. Of a shadow, a silhouette of a man standing at a threshold. That's what it looked like. No signature, no note, and he kept it. I believe so. It may have been in the cabinet. Mercy, Monsieur Rigby. You have been very precise. I find that both useful and, how shall I say, rarely complete. Rigby's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing and exited with quiet dignity. Poirot remained in the study, gazing at the cabinet. The idea of the shadow disturbed him, not because it was dramatic. No, Poirot had seen far stranger things in his time, but because it suggested a message meant for one man alone, a warning, a memory, a threat, or worse, a promise. He made his way upstairs to the master bedroom. The door was unlocked, the bed neatly made. It was a masculine room, dark wood furniture, a collection of cufflinks arranged with military precision, and a decanter of brandy on a tray. Poirot inspected the bedside drawer. It was empty save for a book of poetry by Tennyson and a small silver crucifix. The key was not there. Poirot turned to leave, and paused. Something about the mirror. It was angled too perfectly toward the door. Poirot stepped into its reflection, and from that vantage noticed something behind the armoire, a fine sliver of parchment wedged into the gap between wood and wall. Retrieving it delicately with his tweezers, he unfolded it and stared. It was a drawing. A man. No, a shadow of a man standing alone beneath a stone arch. The style was simple, childlike, but the posture of the figure was unmistakably ominous. No words, no markings. Poirot stared at it for a long time. Later that afternoon, he rejoined Inspector Finchley in the hallway outside the study. The inspector had clearly been stewing in thought. I've spoken to the maid. She says Mr. Devenish had become paranoid the past week, locked his bedroom door every night, wouldn't answer unless she used his full name. Fear does strange things to a man of logic, Poirot replied softly. Did you learn anything else? Yes, about Miss Daphne Vale. Poirot raised an eyebrow. She sleepwalks. Ah, said Poirot, eyes narrowing. That is a complication. Why? Because, now, mon ami, we must ask not only who entered the room but who might have wandered near it, unaware. As the sun dipped low and cast long shadows through the glass of the conservatory, Poirot stood before the wicker chair once more. The dagger remained, gleaming faintly in the last light of day. The room was still locked in every sense. He folded the drawing and tucked it into his notebook that the shadow had entered, and now Poirot would follow it. There was something distinctly tragic about Daphne Vale, though whether it was natural or cultivated, Hercule Poirot could not yet decide. She sat at the window seat in the morning room, her pale hands folded over one another, her slender frame wrapped in a soft ivory shawl that gave her the appearance of a ghost at rest. Outside, the sunlight was caught in the branches of the trees like spun gold, but Daphne's gaze did not seem to register it. She looked instead at something far more distant, as if seeing a place only she could reach. Poirot entered the room. Softly, she turned her head slowly, eyes wide and uncertain, and then offered a faint, brittle smile. You wished to speak with me, Mr. Poirot, she asked, her voice no louder than a whisper carried by wind. If you would be so kind, mademoiselle, he replied, taking the armchair across from her. You were very quiet this morning. Understandable. Yes, grief and shock. They are cruel companions. But now, perhaps, you can help me understand your host. Your final evening with him. Daphne nodded slowly, as though processing each word in turn. He made me uneasy, she said at last. Horace Devenish, he was polite, always, never cruel, but it was his attention. He watched people the way one reads legal briefs. I felt exposed, like I'd already said something wrong. Even in silence, Poirot inclined his head. And your brother, did he feel the same? Daphne hesitated. Marius can charm anyone. He laughed off Horace's little cruelties. He called it intellectual theatre, but I don't think he liked the man. Not truly. You've not known the Devenish long? No, we met Mr. Devenish only once before, at a legal dinner in London. Marius was invited as a rising name in private law. Mr. Devenish spoke to us there, and a few weeks later he wrote to invite us here. Marius thought it might be instructive. Poirot folded his hands. Tell me, mademoiselle, do you sleep deeply? She blinked. Pardon, at night. Do you sleep without disturbance? A blush touched her pale cheeks. Not always. I walk in my sleep. Sometimes I haven't done so in months. But the housemaid mentioned it to the inspector, I think. She saw me in the corridor 2 nights ago. Poirot nodded. And last night? I don't remember. That is the trouble, isn't it? I awoke in my bed, as usual. I had no reason to think I'd moved. He leaned forward gently. Mademoiselle, are you ever aware, in those moments, even faintly, sights, sounds? Sometimes, it's like hearing a dream through water. Did you hear anything this morning? Any sound? A voice? The chime of the grandfather clock. Daphne frowned, lips pressing together. Yes, I heard. Footsteps, light ones, crossing a wooden floor, and a door closing. It felt very far away. I remember ... Assent. Gardenia. Poirot's brow lifted. Curious why? Because Monsieur de Vanish did not wear scent, but someone else in this house does. Daphne's fingers clutched at the shawl. I didn't go into the conservatory, she said quickly. I couldn't have. I would never raise a hand, mademoiselle. I do not say that you did, but the truth, she is like a cat, always slipping behind the curtains. We must not frighten her. He stood, his manner suddenly brisk. One more thing. Do you wear slippers at night? Yes. May I see them? She retrieved them from beneath a side table. They were soft silk, ivory like her shawl, and faintly embroidered with flowers. One of them, Poirot noted, had a dark smudge on its sole. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been very helpful. As he turned to leave, Daphne's voice stopped him. Mr. Poirot, do you think someone in this house killed him? He met her gaze steadily. I think, he said, that only someone inside this house could have. Poirot found Finchley in the hall, staring at a narrow side table that held an antique jardiniere full of wilting lilies. She says she sleepwalks, Finchley muttered. Perfect alibi. You commit murder. You say you weren't awake. Poirot made a small sound of disagreement. Non, it is not an alibi. It is a confusion. We must know not only what was done but what was believed. Tell me the household staff. What did they report about last night? Finchley checked his notes. The maid, Lily, says she heard footsteps upstairs between midnight and 1. She assumed it was Miss Daphne. Mrs. Fitz, the housekeeper, says she heard nothing but smelled perfume near the staircase when she went to the kitchen before dawn. Gardenia. Yes. Poirot tapped his fingers together. What about the slippers? Already sent them for testing. There's earth on one, possibly from the conservatory. So then she was there. Or someone wore her slippers, Poirot said. Think, mon ami. The killer would need soft steps. A diversion. What better than the shoes of the woman no one would question for wandering in the night? Finchley raised a brow. You think she's being framed? Poirot's eyes gleamed. I think we are watching a play, and someone is altering the script. Later that evening, Poirot wandered the garden paths as the sky turned to peach and gold. The hedges were overgrown in places, and the once proud rose garden had begun to fade with the season. The house loomed behind him, grand and tired, its many windows catching the last of the light like dull eyes in an old portrait. At the base of the conservatory, Poirot knelt and examined the flower bed. A small trail of indentations led away from the building, very faint, almost invisible in the loose soil. But Poirot followed them carefully, step by step, until they vanished beneath the sundial. He turned and looked back at the glass wall of the conservatory. If the room had been locked from the inside, there was still only one explanation. Someone had left and returned, or had never truly left at all. He pulled a tape measure from his pocket, one of many seemingly unnecessary items he carried, and measured the width of the footprints. Slender, possibly female, but not certainly. He turned back toward the house. Inside, dinner was being served in a cold, polite silence. Poirot, always punctual, arrived fashionably late, not out of disrespect, but to see what others said in his absence. Mr. Poirot, Aunt Lenora said, her voice carrying across the table. I hope your investigations are proving ... enlightening. They are beginning to cast long shadows, Poirot replied. Anthony grunted. We're all prisoners here. No answers, just suspicion. Poirot looked at him carefully. Suspicion is the mirror of guilt, Monsieur de Vanish. Some flinch from their reflection. Others study it too closely. Clara, seated between Daphne and Rigby, said quietly, have you found the key? The room hushed. Poirot folded his napkin. No, but I believe I will. And when I do, it will tell me whose hands it feared. That night, alone in his guest room, Poirot set the shadow drawing on the desk beside him. He stared at it again. The figure stood at an archway, but it was not merely any door. The shape was familiar. He opened a book of house schematics Finchley had acquired from the county archives. There it was, the arch from the drawing. It was part of the old chapel ruins at the rear edge of the estate. Abandoned for decades, the killer had sent Horace de Vanish a message. One place, one shadow, and perhaps, just perhaps, ... one secret, buried with it. The dawn at Hunter's Edge was stained in frost. The lawns shimmered under a thin silver veil, and the bare trees crackled faintly in the stillness. Poirot, already awake, stood at the window of his guest chamber, watching the garden with the stillness of a man waiting for a curtain to rise. By the time the household stirred, he had already made his decision. There was something calling him beyond the main house, not a sound, but a silence, the kind that begs to be broken. The chapel ruins. The figure in the shadow drawing had been placed deliberately at the foot of an arch, not a symbolic one, but a specific architectural shape. Poirot had seen it in the estate's old map, tucked beside the main house's plans. The ruined chapel had not been in use for over 80 years. Its stones now colonized by ivy and time. It was there he would begin. At precisely 8:30, Poirot and Inspector Finchley stepped off the main path, past the last of the clipped hedges, and into the overgrown rear grounds of Hunter's Edge. The chapel ruins emerged slowly, like a shipwreck half submerged in bramble. Only the skeleton facade remained, a broken archway, a few surviving pillars, and a low wall now blanketed in creeping moss. A bird startled from the trees and flew overhead as they approached. "Why here?" Finchley asked, pulling his coat tighter. "The place is dead." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Precisely, and in death sometimes one speaks more honestly." He stepped over a low stone and approached the archway. It stood tall, ancient, the last standing fragment of what must have once been a proud structure. Poirot pointed to the base. There, partially obscured by moss and age, was a carving, a single letter VV for Vale. Finchley asked. "Possibly," Poirot murmured, "or vengeance, or Victor, or perhaps simply 5. But it is not the carving that matters, it is the positioning." He crouched and examined the stone. "You see here, the earth has been disturbed recently. Fresh footprints." Finchley bent low. "Could be gardeners, animals, Nan, look at the spacing. A man stood here." He stood still for quite some time. His weight pressed into the soil. Poirot turned slowly. "And here, this wall. Do you see the shape of it?" Finchley squinted. "It curves, exactly. Not a wall. A whispering wall, built with a curvature so that two people can speak from opposite ends and still hear one another, even in whispers. An old trick of ecclesiastical architecture." Finchley ran his hand along the stone. "So someone met Horace de Venice here, or planned to. Quietly, secretly." Poirot nodded. "And the shadow drawing, it was not a threat, it was a memory, or a summons. Something happened here once, years ago, and someone wanted Mr. Devenish to remember it." Finchley frowned. "Then why kill him?" Poirot brushed a leaf from the mossy surface. "Because remembering the truth is sometimes the most dangerous act of all." Back at the house, breakfast was a strained affair. Poirot, uncharacteristically silent, ate only half a croissant and drank his coffee lukewarm. His eyes drifted over each face seated at the table. Anthony de Venish's mood was foul, and he barely acknowledged Poirot's presence. Aunt Lenora attempted polite chatter but was met with cold glances. Clara answered every question with precision. Daphne appeared fragile again, though Poirot noticed her hands were steady now, too steady. Only Marius Vale seemed unchanged, slicing an apple with calm indifference. After the meal, Poirot approached Clara discreetly. "Mademoiselle, may I ask a question? Your uncle, did he ever mention an event at the chapel ruins?" Clara looked startled. "The ruins? No, he hated them. Once said the church had no place without justice. I remember that clearly. And did he ever speak of a man named Victor?" Her brows knit. "Victor? No, never. Why?" But Poirot merely smiled. "Just a little curiosity of mine. I am always listening for echoes." Poirot requested a short meeting with Marius Vale next, in the conservatory, of all places. Marius entered, taking the site of the chair where Horace Devenish had died with cool detachment. The bloodstain had long since been cleaned, but the ghost of it lingered in the eye. "Mr. Vale," Poirot said, "you are a man of legal skill. You understand that words, especially written ones, are often more dangerous than any weapon." Marius smiled faintly. "Mr. Poirot, are you accusing me of paper cuts?" Poirot did not smile. "You knew Mr. Devenish from court." "Our fathers did, not us. I met Horace only twice before this visit. And yet he invited you here." "Yes, I believe he enjoyed seeing potential in young minds. Or perhaps he wanted to measure us, or manipulate. Possibly, though I'd say that was your line of work, not mine." Poirot allowed himself a small nod. "Touché. And tell me, did you know he kept personal files on his guests? Secrets?" Marius's smile faded slightly. "I'd heard rumors. A talent for leverage, shall we say." Poirot studied him carefully. "Would such leverage be damaging to you?" Marius met his gaze squarely. "Nothing in my past would impress Mr. Devenish. I live in the present." Poirot leaned forward. "And in the present, monsieur, where were you between 7 and 8 yesterday morning?" "In my room, asleep, alone." "Yes, no one can confirm." Marius's jaw tensed. "No, I didn't expect to be suspected. Everyone is suspected. Mr. Vale, innocence is not a passport, it is a puzzle to be solved." He let the words hang. Marius offered no reply. That evening Poirot retired to his room and began laying out his thoughts. He cleared the desk of its ornaments and spread out what he knew: a locked room, a missing key, a precision wound, no struggle, a missing document, the shadow drawing, a ruined chapel, a trail of perfume and silk slippers, a frightened woman who couldn't remember her dreams, a man whose charm had armor beneath it. Then the knock at his door. He opened it to find Clara Devenish, pale and grave. "I've remembered something," she said. "Come in, mademoiselle." She sat stiffly in the armchair. 2 nights ago, before the murder, I was walking back from the library after midnight. I saw something." Poirot leaned forward. "Yes, I saw Marius. He was by the garden door. He looked like he was trying to open it quietly, and did he? I don't know. I was frightened. I slipped away before he saw me." Poirot folded his hands. "Merci, mademoiselle. You may have just moved a very large piece on the chessboard." She stood to go. At the door she paused. "Mr. Poirot." "Yes, I don't think Daphne is as helpless as she looks." Poirot nodded. Slowly. "Nor do I." As the clock struck 11, Poirot once again gazed out toward the chapel ruins. The truth was beginning to shift beneath his feet. Secrets old and new were rising from their graves, and somewhere in this house, the killer was watching, waiting, but Poirot too was watching, and the shadow, it had already begun to take shape. The morning air was bracing, and for once, the sky above Hunter's Edge was untroubled, a soft blue wash that stretched over the rooftops and trees like a silken veil. But for Hercule Poirot, the weather was merely cosmetic. Beneath the calm, something stirred. It was not merely the mystery of a locked room murder. It was something else, a quiet war of glances at the breakfast table, the strategic silences, the choreography of politeness that now masked every word and movement. The house had entered its second stage, no longer mourning, but concealing. Today, he would focus on the most elusive player of all, the object that was missing, the key and the scent. By mid-morning, Poirot stood in the conservatory once again, turning slowly in a circle. The sunlight filtered in differently now, casting more honest shadows, where once had been silence. Now the house creaked and whispered with life. Poirot knelt beside the glass door that led to the garden and traced his fingers along the interior brass bolt. "Inspector," he called. Finchley appeared behind him, arms folded. "You've circled this room 10 times. Found your killer in the ivy, have you?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Nan, but I have found something your eyes did not care to linger upon." He pointed. "You see the latch here, just beneath the bolt?" Finchley crouched. "Yes, it's undamaged." "Not quite. Observe the tiniest crack in the interior catch. Very fine. It does not prevent the door from locking, but it does make closing it from the outside possible." Finchley blinked. "You think the killer exited through here after the murder? Or before?" Poirot said. "Perhaps they staged the body. Or replaced something. Either way, the lock was not as secure as it seemed. We were meant to believe it was a perfect seal, but even perfection lies." He rose and turned his gaze to the corner of the conservatory where a cluster of tropical plants stood in heavy stone planters. The ground beneath them was lined with moss and bark, carefully arranged to retain moisture, and nestled there, not hidden, not obvious, was a crumpled white handkerchief. Poirot retrieved it with tweezers, a delicate square of embroidered linen, slightly damp, no initials, but unmistakably perfumed. Finchley stepped closer. "Is that gardenia?" Poirot said softly. "They called in the housemaid Lily for questioning. She stood in the hallway, nervous and pinching the corner of her apron. "I didn't take anything, sir," she said at once. Poirot smiled gently. Non. Mademoiselle, we do not accuse you. We ask only, who in the house wears the perfume called gardenia?" Lily relaxed slightly. "Miss Daphne, sir, she's the only one. None of the others." "No, sir, not Mrs. de Venish. She wears violet. Clara doesn't wear perfume at all." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, Lily. One more question. Has Miss Daphne been downstairs during the night recently?" The girl hesitated. "I've seen her once or twice, not for days though. Last time was 2 nights ago. She was in her dressing gown, just drifting. Looked like she was sleepwalking. I didn't disturb her." "Where was she?" "By the back stairs, near the old servants' corridor." Poirot exchanged a glance with Finchley. "Merci. That is all." In the drawing room, Daphne sat reading a small volume of poetry. She looked up as Poirot entered, her face pale but composed. "You look tired, mademoiselle," he said gently. "I'm used to tiredness," she replied. "Even so, you have been active. Perhaps more than you know." She said nothing. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew the handkerchief in a sealed bag. "Does this belong to you?" She stared at it for a long time. It was found in the conservatory." "I don't remember being there." Poirot's tone shifted slightly. "And yet your scent was the same that lingers in the corridor, the same that a servant smelled before dawn, the same that." He paused. Daphne's voice was tight. "You think I killed him, don't you?" Poirot's reply was quiet. "I think, mademoiselle, that something is hidden, either by you or from you." She stood abruptly. "I didn't want to come here," she whispered. "Marius insisted. He said Horace owed us something. But from the moment I arrived, I felt as though the house hated me." Poirot rose with her. "You have memories you do not wish to keep. That is clear. But be careful, Miss Daphne. The mind that forgets too well often leaves its body behind." Poirot found Marius Vale in the billiards room, practicing a break. "I suppose you've come to ask if I wear women's perfume," Marius said dryly. "Nan, I have come to ask what your business with Mr. de Venish truly was." Marius straightened. "That's bold. So is murder." Marius looked away. "We wanted a case file. From 20 years ago." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Allegau case a custody dispute between our father and a woman named Eugenie Martel. It was buried quietly. Mr. de Venish oversaw it." Poirot was silent for a moment. "And what interest did you have in this case?" Marius sighed. "Daphne is not my full sister, Poirot. She never knew. Our father had a liaison, Eugenie. When it ended, there was a child. De Venish ruled against her, took the child away." Poirot's mind clicked. "So Daphne... Marius nodded. "She's not my sister by law, not in blood, but she is family to me, and Mr. de Venish knew this. He reminded us of it constantly. Poirot sat slowly on the edge of the table. Then tell me, monsieur, did your sister know the truth? I told her 3 days ago after dinner. She was devastated. Did she confront Mr. de Venish? She went silent. That's her way. She folds and retreats. Poirot said nothing for a long while. Then, you understand, of course, that motive now surrounds you both, not for revenge but for shame, and the reclaiming of truth. Marius's face darkened. If you think I'd murder a man for a past I didn't create, then you've misunderstood me entirely. Poirot's voice was calm. Not misunderstood, monsieur, only clarified. That evening Poirot walked alone to the conservatory. Once again, the glass roof shimmered in the low light, and the memory of blood seemed to hover just beneath the floorboards. He stood before the wicker chair. The bolt had been moved, repaired sometime in the last year. The crack in the latch could have existed for months. But the door's floor was known now. He turned behind one of the potted ferns. Just beneath the wooden windowsill, he saw something else. Not a key, a matchstick. Poirot lifted it, examined it. French brand expansive. He turned it in his fingers, then smiled faintly. Mon Dieu, he whispered, you lit the way, you little fool. The sky above Hunter's Edge that evening flared in unnatural reds and golds, a painter's sunset, furious and beautiful. It cast long shadows across the lawn, the hedgerows, and finally the stone fountain near the conservatory, where Poirot now stood, a matchstick turning between his fingers. He had found it by the fern pot, a single French-made matchstick, delicately crafted and far too fine for the utilitarian needs of a country estate. Poirot knew the brand Éclat Noir, luxury matches sold only in select boutiques, typically in Paris or Brussels, the sort of thing a man with aesthetic pride would carry in a silver case. Not, for example, Mr. Horace de Venish, and not likely Daphne Vale, which left one man. The billiards room was deserted when Poirot entered, but not for long. Moments later, Marius Vale strolled in with the easy confidence of someone used to an audience. His tie had been loosened, his sleeves rolled slightly, an image of casual elegance, but Poirot saw the tension in his knuckles, the quick dart of his eyes. Mr. Vale, Poirot said quietly, may I offer you a moment of honesty? Must we? Marius replied lightly, pouring himself a drink. I was rather enjoying the ambiguity. Poirot did not smile. Instead, he reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew the matchstick in its small, evidence envelope. Marius stilled. I suppose you're wondering where I bought it, he said after a pause. I already. Nope. The Éclat Noir counter at Legrand's in Paris. You were seen buying them 3 weeks ago. By coincidence, I was there too. I noticed small things. You believe I used this one to light a fire? Marius asked, voice still composed. I believe you used it to light a candle. A candle, yes, in the conservatory. You see, the matches Mr. de Venish used were of the common kitchen variety. The match you left is yours, and the scent of beeswax remains faintly near the arm of the wicker chair. Marius looked away, so I lit a candle. Hardly criminal. Poirot's voice lowered, unless it was to read something ... in the dark. Marius laughed once, sharply. You think I broke in to read bedtime stories to the corpse? No, I think you came back to retrieve something and you needed to see. The laughter died. I came back, Marius said, slowly, because I knew he kept files. I thought if I could find the cabinet key, I could learn more about the case, about my sister, about her mother. And did you know? Marius snapped. He was already dead, and the key was gone. Poirot stepped closer. You admit being in the conservatory after the murder. I found him. I panicked. I left. That's the truth. No, said Poirot softly. That is part of the truth. But what happened before? Why, Monsieur Vale, did you truly come to this house? Not for curiosity. Not for civility. Marius drained his drink. For justice, he said coldly. For a mother buried without her child. Later that night, Poirot walked the gardens with Inspector Finchley. The torches had been lit, rare, antique oil lamps that lined the main walkways of the estate and flickered in the wind. Do you believe him? Finchley asked. I believe he thinks he's telling the truth, Poirot said. But he omits what he does not wish to know. Such as his sister. Poirot replied. Daphne knows more than she admits. You think she lied. I think she withheld. Which, in this house, is nearly the same thing. They turned a corner near the east wing and found Clara Devenish leaning against the stone railing, looking out toward the trees. Poirot greeted her gently. Mademoiselle, are you troubled? She looked back at him with tired eyes. Isn't everyone? You have been very calm, very controlled. Some would say cold. Grief, mademoiselle, wears many coats. But tell me, you grew up in this house. Yes, every summer I stayed with Uncle Horace while my parents traveled. I hated it then. I hate it now. Poirot tilted his head. Why? She hesitated. He frightened me. Because of what he said. No, because of what he knew. Horace Devenish collected secrets like stamps. He asked questions no child should answer. He had this way of watching people. He felt peeled. Poirot waited. Clara said quietly. He said something to me last summer, just one sentence. I've never forgotten it. What was it? She looked down. You'll regret what you did to your cousin more than anything you do to yourself. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Which cousin? But Clara didn't answer. She turned and walked back toward the house. That night Poirot requested access to the servants' corridor, a narrow winding passage that ran behind the main bedrooms and connected the old kitchen, scullery and attic stairs. Few of the guests even knew it existed. He walked it slowly, noting the drafts, the dust, the echoes, and at the far end, above the scullery, he found the old dumbwaiter inside. Resting at the bottom was a single object, a brass key, polished, unmarked. Old Poirot held it up in the lamplight and smiled grimly. Voila, he whispered. Le fantôme a laissé son empreinte. The ghost has left its fingerprint. The brass key lay in Poirot's palm, glinting faintly in the lamplight like a coin dredged up from an ancient well. It was heavier than he expected, worn smooth with time, its bow curved in an ornate fleur-de-lis design, a style popular in England half a century ago, but unusual in modern keys. It was unmistakably old, but more important than age was purpose, and Poirot was standing alone in the narrow servants' corridor behind the scullery. If he knew exactly where this key belonged, not just in a lock but in someone's hand or by sunrise. He stood once again in Horace de Venish's study, facing the glass-fronted cabinet that had remained unopened since the murder. The dust on the shelf, it had been disturbed. Rigby had claimed de Venish always kept the key in one of two places around his neck, or in the drawer beside his bed. Yet it had been in neither. It had been hidden, not misplaced, not forgotten, concealed. Poirot drew a breath, and inserted the key. It turned with the resistance of an old promise. The cabinet clicked open inside. Neat rows of black folders, bound in ribbon, a few envelopes marked personal, and in the very center, lying alone on a velvet tray, was the original shadow drawing. Poirot lifted it carefully. No words, no markings, just the stark silhouette of a man beneath the arch of the ruined chapel. A memory, a warning, or both, but the folders, they were far more telling. They bore initials C.D. R. D. Den. D. Imb. M. E. R. L. D. C. L. R. A. Anthony. Daphne, Marius, Ewan Rigby, Lenora de Venish, a complete set. Finchley entered the study just as Poirot was untying the ribbon on the folder marked CD. Found the key then, Finchley said, peering in. Where was it? In the dumbwaiter shaft at the end of the servants' corridor. Finchley raised an eyebrow. Thrown away. No, Poirot said, flipping open the first page. Lowered, hidden, tucked where no one would look. It is the killer's last mistake. Finchley exhaled slowly. Well, what's in them? Observations, letters, extracts of testimony. Mr. Devenish, it seems, fancied himself a collector of scenes, a connoisseur of guilt. He handed Finchley a sheet from the CD. File. It read, Clara Devenish -1923 confession letter written but unsent. Substance. Confession to striking cousin Anthony with a riding crop at age 13, resulting in fracture of the hand. Covered up by parents. Suspected later because of Anthony's lifelong nerve pain. Clara believes the truth buried. Carries guilt. Finchley blinked. My God, only a childhood injury, Poirot said. But to Clara, it is the root of a slow, silent shame, and to Horace the perfect leash. Finchley reached for the next file. DV. Daphne Vale, 1928 birth record traced to Eugenie Martel. Paris's legal dispute settled in private court. Child removed from mother under allegation of mental instability. Presiding Judge H. Devenish, adoption papers sealed. Daphne never told. Psychological risk high if revealed without care. Finchley read it twice. He knew he presided over the very case that separated her from her mother. Poirot nodded grimly, and kept the file in his private archive. Finchley moved to the next folder. A.D. Anthony Devenish -1929 gambling debts, settled secretly by uncle. £3,000 repaid through coerced sale of family land. Anthony resents Devenish's control, has threatened him verbally, in jest and in anger. Letter. To bookmaker, intercepted by house staff. Devenish retained copy. Poirot murmured, each of them with motive, and each of them unaware that the others were equally ensnared. Finchley opened the final folder. But it was empty. The two men looked at each other. Poirot whispered, "C'est curio." Finchley nodded. He removed it. Or someone else did, Poirot said, after the murder. By mid-morning, Poirot had called a private meeting with Ewan Rigby in the study. The man looked drawn, even more gaunt than usual, his composure cracking at the edges. You asked to see me, he said, voice clipped. Poirot gestured to the open cabinet, the files. Monsieur, each guest, each relative, their secrets preserved like old wines. Rigby's eyes flicked to the folders, then quickly away. Except yours, Poirot said. Rigby said nothing. Were you aware your folder is missing? No, Rigby said carefully. Do you know what was inside it? No. Poirot stood, walked to the window. Monsieur Rigby, you have worked for Mr. Devenish for 9 years. You were the only one permitted in his private chambers. You knew the layout of the house, the locks, the routine. Rigby's tone sharpened. You accusing me? I am observing, monsieur. That is my art. Rigby's shoulders tightened. I didn't kill him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Then perhaps you can tell me where the key to the cabinet was kept, for I found it not in the drawer, nor on his person, but in the dumbwaiter shaft. Rigby's composure finally cracked. I don't know. I swear he must have moved it. Poirot said nothing. Then, gently, were you protecting him, or protecting someone else? Rigby's voice was a whisper. I burned my own file. That's what you want to hear, isn't it? I found the key after he died. I went into the study. I saw my name in that cabinet, and I panicked. I didn't know what he'd written. I had to erase it. Poirot stepped forward. You admit this? Yes, Poirot nodded slowly. Then you must also admit that in doing so, you tampered with a crime scene, and gave yourself the appearance of guilt. Rigby sank into a chair. I didn't kill him, no, Poirot said, but you feared you had reason to. That evening, Poirot requested that all members of the household gather in the drawing room. A hush settled over the guests as the detective entered. He stood by the hearth, fingers pressed together, eyes scanning the room like a judge awaiting silence. My friends, he began, the moment is soon approaching when the murderer among us shall be revealed. A few gasps. Daphne visibly flinched. Poirot continued, I have found the key that should not be found. I have read the secrets that should not be written, and I have seen the shadows that pass silently behind locked doors. He turned to each guest in turn. To strike down Horace Devane required more than hatred. It required opportunity and knowledge of the door's broken latch, of his routines, of his fears, and of the one thing he never could protect. Poirot withdrew the drawing from his pocket and held it up, his past. No one moved. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Tomorrow, he said, you shall all gather again, and the truth, every whispered piece of it, shall come to light. The following morning dawned cold and windless, as if the estate itself were bracing for something inevitable. The stillness of Hunter's Edge had taken on a new quality, not the quiet of grief, but the hush before revelation. A silence that anticipated a name. Poirot dressed with particular care. His grey three-piece suit was pressed to perfection, his patent leather shoes glinting like mirrors, and his signature mustache groomed with almost military precision. He chose a pale lavender handkerchief for his breast pocket, a subtle nod to mourning, but not surrender. By 10 o'clock, all members of the household had assembled in the drawing room, summoned by Poirot's formal request the night before. The atmosphere was suffocating. Clara sat by the piano, ramrod straight, her fingers clenched in her lap. Anthony lounged near the fireplace with a cigarette unlit between his fingers, his jaw tight. Aunt Lenora dabbed her eyes with an aura-dyed damp handkerchief, the glitter of her brooches dulled by tension. Ewan Rigby stood stiffly by the windows, as if waiting to be arrested. Daphne Vale had taken the chair closest to the fire, her eyes distant, her frame swaddled in a pale shawl. Marius Vale remained beside her, one hand resting protectively on the back of her seat. Poirot entered last, with Inspector Finchley trailing behind, notebook in hand. He paused by the hearth, his gaze passing from face to face. Mies Amos, Poirot said gently, I thank you for your presence. Today we shall speak the truth. Not the truth you have rehearsed, not the truth that hides behind family loyalty or fear, but the truth that remains when all else has crumbled. A beat of silence. Let us begin then with a chair. Everyone looked at him blankly. Poirot gestured toward the conservatory. Behind the drawing room, Mr. de Venish was found seated in a wicker chair, perfectly upright, perfectly placed. But this was not where he died. A ripple of confusion, Poirot continued. The blood pattern, the angle of the wound, the absence of arterial spray, they all tell a story. The chair was arranged. The killer placed him there. Post-mortem. Why? To sell the illusion of serenity, of solitude. But murder is rarely serene. He turned to Clara. Miss de Venish, you were the first to see the body, were you not? Clara swallowed. Yes. You opened the conservatory door, the one now known to have a broken interior latch. Yes, you noticed nothing odd. She hesitated. It seemed too quiet, because the killer wanted it that way. Poirot stepped to the center of the room. Now to the key. The cabinet key that went missing from the drawer by Mr. de Venish's bed. A key that no one could find. He held it aloft. I found it, in the dumbwaiter shaft. Lowered there after the murder. Gasps Poirot. Turned to Ewan Rigby. Monsieur, you admitted to finding the key and removing your file. Rigby stood, pale. Yes, I did. I panicked. Poirot nodded. That panic has cleared you of murder. Because when you found Mr. de Venish, he was already seated, but the chair, you see, was only moved after the body was cleaned. Rigby looked stunned. Then who? Poirot raised a finger. The true killer knew about the cabinet, knew what was inside, and knew that if their secret came to light, it would not just destroy their name, it would destroy someone they loved. He turned now, slowly, deliberately, toward Daphne Vale. Miss Daphne, he said, gently, you were sleepwalking. Again the night before the murder. She blinked, lips parting slightly. I don't know, but someone used your movements, your perfume, and even your slippers to frame you. They walked your path, they left your scent, they planted your handkerchief. Daphne looked suddenly to Marius, confused. But why? Poirot's voice softened. Because, chère mademoiselle, your brother wanted to protect you, even if it meant casting suspicion on you temporarily to conceal what he had done. Marius rose slowly. You're wrong. Poirot nodded politely. No, I am not. Shall I tell you what happened? He turned to the group now, his voice growing stronger. Marius Vale came to this house not as a guest, but as a man, on a mission. He had discovered the truth of Daphne's birth, that she had been taken from her mother under the judgment of Horace de Venice himself, a case sealed and hidden. Marius wanted answers. He wanted revenge. Marius's face was stone. He searched Mr. de Venish's room 2 nights before the murder, but found nothing. And so, on the morning in question, he rose before dawn and entered the conservatory through the garden door. The broken latch allowed him to close the bolt from outside with a right touch. Poirot now held up the matchstick, sealed in its evidence pouch. He brought a match, he lit a candle, and he confronted Horace de Venice. Poirot stepped forward. Perhaps he did not intend to kill him. Perhaps it was a struggle. Perhaps Mr. de Venice mocked you, said the child deserved to be taken. Perhaps he told you that Daphne's mother went mad. Poirot paused. But you struck. Marius's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot went on. You stabbed him cleanly. You've trained in anatomy. The knife was yours. Italian, a gift, kept in your travel case. Antony's voice broke the silence. Then why move? The body. Poirot turned. Because Marius knew he needed time. He had to frame the scene. He made it look peaceful. Cleaned the floor with a towel later found under the garden steps. Then he placed the body back in the chair. He slipped out, returned to his room, waited. Poirot turned to Daphne now. And when you woke that morning, you remembered hearing footsteps. A door gardenia. You had been near the scene, but you had not killed him. And Marius thought that if blame fell to you, it would be easy to shift later. Confusion would give him space to destroy the files. Daphne stood, staring at her brother. Is it true? Marius looked at her, his composure finally cracking. He ruined her life, he said quietly. He destroyed her. Our mother died, alone, mad, shamed, and he sat in this house like a god. He looked to Poirot. I didn't plan it. I saw him there that morning and I snapped. Poirot gave a slow nod. And you nearly succeeded. But guilt, monsieur, is like a match. It always leaves a scent behind. The room remained silent as Inspector Finchley stepped forward and placed a hand on Marius Vale's shoulder. He did not resist. Daphne sat, stunned, her hands shaking as if trying to hold on to something invisible. Poirot turned to the others. The truth is a blade sharp, painful, but necessary. Mr. de Venice believed in collecting other people's sins. In the end, it was his own that condemned him. He walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens and beyond them, the ruined chapel. The shadow entered alone. Yes, but the past, it never does. The drawing room slowly emptied, like a theater after the final curtain. The audience, stunned, subdued, filed away in silence. No applause given, no bows taken. Marius Vale had not spoken a word since the revelation. He walked calmly, almost gently, beside Inspector Finchley as he was led out of Hunter's Edge and into the waiting police car. His expression was neither triumphant nor remorseful. If anything, it carried the air of a man who had finally stopped running from something only he could see. Daphne did not watch her brother go. She had withdrawn to the morning room immediately after the confession, her shawl wrapped tightly around her, though the fire burned high. When Poirot entered a few minutes later, she didn't turn. I didn't know, she whispered, eyes fixed on the flames. He never told me. Poirot closed the door softly behind him. Perhaps he believed he was protecting you, he said. She looked over her shoulder, her expression blank. By murdering a man, Poirot did not answer at once. He stepped to the window and looked out. The lawn was silver with frost again. The pond in the distance edged with ice. Mademoiselle, he said gently, your brother was a man of 2 minds, one half filled with righteous fury, the other with the burden of love. She turned slowly to face him. Did he really think framing me would help? I do not believe he meant for you to be blamed, Poirot said. He meant only to confuse, to delay, to dismantle a stage upon which Mr. de Venice had stood for far too long. Daphne blinked slowly. Did you know that I used to sleep beneath the chapel window when I was little? I thought the shadows were ghosts. I was afraid of them. Poirot tilted his head. You feared your past, mademoiselle, but it was never the shadow's fault. She gave a thin smile. I think I'll go home now. Somewhere, ... smaller. Poirot inclined his head. Sometimes one must leave the stage in order to find oneself again. In the hours that followed, the house at Hunter's Edge deflated. Antony de Venice left first, tossing his half-packed suitcase into the boot of his car with a graceless grunt. He neither said goodbye to Poirot nor made eye contact with Clara, who stood in the corridor, silently, arms folded. Aunt Lenora followed soon after, her sobs now quieter, more performative, as though she too had tired of the charade. Clara lingered. She approached Poirot in the entryway, where he stood inspecting a pair of porcelain Staffordshire dogs on a shelf. Is it really over? She asked. Poirot looked at her. The case. Yes. The consequences never. She nodded once. He left everything to me, you know, Uncle Horace. The house, the land, the estate accounts. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A generous inheritance, a cruel one, she replied. I don't want any of it. I never did then give it away. Clara looked surprised. To whom? To those whose voices were stolen by Horace de Venice, to those whose names he erased. You now hold the power he once did, mademoiselle. The question is, will you wield it better? She studied him for a moment, then nodded and walked away. Poirot spent his final hour in the conservatory. The room had been cleaned again, the wicker chair now removed entirely. New lilies had been placed in the tall glass vases, and the scent of gardenia, faint, ghost-like, lingered in the corners like an unfinished sentence. He stood where the chair once was, hands folded behind his back, and looked out the window toward the ruined chapel that so much had started there. A mother had lost her child, a judgment had been made, a man had sealed a fate behind velvet and ink, and a brother, years later, had come back to tear open the coffin of truth, not with reason, but with a blade. Poirot did not excuse murder. He never would, but he understood it at its core. Murder was never about death, but about desperation, and few things were more desperate than the desire to right a wrong buried in silence. He turned to go, and paused. On the windowsill, beside a small potted orchid, sat something unexpected, a new envelope. It bore no name. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter and a single photograph. The photo was old, faded, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat, standing outside a courthouse, with a baby in her arms. She was smiling, but her eyes were not. Written on the back in blocky handwriting were the words, Eugenie, Paris, 1928. She deserved better. The letter, handwritten in a strong slanted script, was unsigned. Monsieur Poirot, you will no doubt have deduced that I found the photograph among Horace's things long ago. I kept it not because I believed I could undo what was done, but because I wanted to remember her face, my mother's face. Now that the storm has passed, I wish to begin again. But I wish also to remember. You said truth is a blade. Perhaps, but it can also be a light. Thank you for showing me both. Poirot folded the note and slipped it into his coat pocket. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the ivy. Sav, the taxi, drove him down the gravel path. Poirot turned once to look back at the house. Hunter's Edge stood tall against the winter sky, proud, wounded, but no longer hiding. He murmured to himself, even the grandest houses cannot keep secrets forever. Finchley, seated beside him, chuckled softly. You say that like you're sorry, Poirot. I am not sorry, mon ami, only reflective, in the case satisfying. Poirot gave a small shrug. Satisfying, perhaps, but justice real. Justice does not always wear robes. Sometimes she wears silence. He adjusted his cuffs. And sometimes a little gardenia.